This is a podcast from Cambridge Assessment International Education. For further information, please visit www.cambridgeinternational.org.
Hello and welcome to the latest University Admissions podcast from Cambridge International. My name is Roshan, part of the recognitions team here at Cambridge International, and today we're focusing on applying to UK medical schools. Medicine in the UK is taught at an undergraduate level, meaning that many medical students start their studies direct from high school. Medical courses are typically 5 or 6 years in duration, which allow graduates provisional registration with the General Medical Council, the GMC. They then undertake 2 years training as a junior doctor by working in a hospital. The depth that the Cambridge International A-levels or the pre-U courses offer provide good preparation for the study of medicine. There are now over 30 medical schools in the UK accepting applications for undergraduate study, but check carefully as a small number, such as the universities of Warwick or Swansea, are graduate entry only. Most medical schools are part of a wider university, such as Manchester or Edinburgh or UEA. But some are specialist health institutions such as St George's University in London. In 2016, the UK government announced an increase in medical school places, meaning that many medical schools have extra places and new medical schools were launched in cities such as Sunderland and Canterbury. However, places remain extremely competitive and are limited for international students. To help you with your applications, or if you are supporting learners through the process, we're pleased to be able to share with you some advice and explain the process of applying to study medicine in the UK. I'm therefore delighted to be joined by Jess Smith from the University of East Anglia, home to Norwich Medical School, Aaron Mortlock and Mark Shannon from Cambridge Assessment Admissions Testing, who develop and deliver the BMAT, one of the 2 admissions tests used by UK universities. Thank you to all for joining us. Jess, could you tell us a bit more about your role?
Yes, hi, my name is Jess and I work for the University of East Anglia, which is home to Norwich Medical School. I've worked with the university now for just over 7 years, and it is my job to work with schools in the UK and across Europe to help advise students who may be applying for medicine and a range of our courses at the university.
Thanks, Jess. Aaron?
Yes, of course. So my name's Aaron Mortlock. I'm a manager in Cambridge Assessment Admissions Testing, and we are responsible for BMAT. My role is global, but I work closely with the universities in the UK to make sure that they feel supported in using BMAT and also to make sure it remains relevant for them.
And Mark?
I'm Mark Shannon. I'm the assessment group manager who works on BMAT, and I was involved in its development back in 2002-03, and I'm still involved in its ongoing production.
Thank you very much. So first of all, to ask our panel, what advice do you have for students who are maybe considering medicine and going about choosing their international A-level or pre-U subjects?
So my advice would be make sure that you look at the different medical schools in the UK. What are their entrance requirements? So do they require, a lot of them will require biology at the international A-level, a lot might require chemistry, some might require other particular subjects. I know for UEA ourselves, we require biology or chemistry in the international A-level, but please do make sure that you are looking around the different universities because some will have specific requirements. And it is beneficial to make sure that you are covering all of your bases and that you're choosing A-levels, international A-levels, that you'll be able to apply to a lot of different universities with.
I think that's a really good point, and I'm sure, Aaron, from the universities that you visited, they're all slightly different, I guess, with requirements.
Yes, exactly. We're seeing a lot of differences as well as similarities in what they require. And I think one of the big things to mention is that make sure when you're looking at their websites, check which admissions test you need to take so that you make sure you're taking the right one, whether that's BMAT or whether that's UCAT.
Definitely, sound advice. And in terms of the selection process for medical schools, how important are the IGCSEs in the overall kind of weighting and application process?
So again, it does vary depending on the university, but for ourselves at UEA, the IGCSEs are something that we look at initially in the first stage. So when the application comes to us, we will look at the IGCSE requirement because we do have a requirement at IGCSE. So we require a minimum of 6 subjects at either A or a star or 7 and above. So we look at that first of all before we look at the international A-levels. However, some universities might not look at the IGCSE as in depth as we do. So again, that's why we say make sure that you are aware of the universities that you are applying to, but they can be very important, particularly for universities like ourselves.
So for a student who is working their way through their IGCSE courses or maybe just about to start their international A-levels, what preparation could a student be doing at that time for either considering their admissions test in the future or more generally for applying for medicine?
One of the useful things to bear in mind is that for BMAT, the science content that you need to know is roughly what will be covered during the GCSE years or IGCSE years. So it's the things you will have covered up until about the age of 16. And what BMAT looks into is that you understand the principles that underpin the science. So it's worth bearing that in mind as you prepare for your IGCSEs, that information will be useful in the future.
So the same would go for the universities, different universities who are using the UCAT, which is the University's Clinical Aptitude Test. And that's what we use at UEA. And although it is more looking at how your mind works, how you respond, because it is very fast moving, you do have to have an understanding of the IGCSE maths, in particularly in terms of the quantitative reasoning.
And I guess for a student who is maybe has some time in the holidays between finishing their IGCSEs and moving on to their international A-levels, it's a good time to start researching and looking at different options, as Aaron said earlier, to make sure you know what you're applying to and then you can prepare for that accordingly. Now, many of our listeners will be familiar with the UCAS process, but there are a few differences with applying to medical schools compared to other courses. Jess, perhaps you could talk us through the timeline for applying for medicine.
So my main piece of advice would be that it's never too early to start thinking about medicine. Medicine is obviously a very intensive course at university, and it is a lifestyle after. It is a career, but it is a lifestyle. So my advice would be to start thinking about medicine quite early on and to start doing your research. In terms of the actual deadlines, obviously there are deadlines for sitting the BMAT and the UCAT prior. But in terms of the main deadlines, if you are applying through UCAS, you have to bear in mind that in the UCAS cycle, the medicine, veterinary dentistry application deadline is much earlier. So it is the 15th of October, so almost a year prior for you going to university.
And one of the differences I know is a smaller number of courses that medical students can apply for, 4 instead of the 5 that is usual. What advice would the panel have for students to maybe use their 5th choice?
So a lot of students do choose to obviously apply for 4 medical schools, and with that 5th choice they might choose to do something else. So they might choose to apply for biomedicine, they might want to do molecular biology and genetics, they might want to do pharmacy as their 5th choice, because as we have mentioned earlier, medicine is extremely competitive, which is why we have that extra 5th choice for something different where your skills that you've developed in your international A-levels, throughout your GCSEs, and from some of the volunteering or work experience that you may have done can be absolutely essential for that, and they are kind of linked to medical career.
I completely agree with that. I think it's worth thinking about, if medicine wasn't the course you're able to get on, then what else would you do? And how is that relevant and how is it similar to what you might experience on a medical course? So think about programs that are very similar and what things might attribute across programs. So you're prepared for an application across the 4 medical schools you may apply to, as well as a 5th program.
One of the challenges, if you're perhaps applying to slightly different subject areas, is writing a personal statement, which is an important part, we know, of the UCAS process. What advice would you have for students when writing and developing their personal statement?
So obviously with your personal statement, you really want to highlight why you are the best possible candidate for that course, why you have the skills, the knowledge, and the interest, the passion for that particular subject. But as you mentioned, if you're applying for 4 medical schools, obviously you want to be focusing on medicine to give yourself the best possible chance. Often your personal statement may be used as one of the bases for your interview. So a lot of medical schools in the UK do interview, so they may use your personal statement for that. However, you are applying for a 5th subject as well, so it is about making sure that normally they will be quite linked and talking about some of the core skills that balance across the 2 different areas.
The biggest piece of advice I'd give for students is to maintain the personal statement. So remember that it's your statement. You're the one that's going to be questioned on it, possibly, and it's your chance to give everything extra you can in your application process. So although you may get others, such as parents or teachers, to give you advice on it, make sure it's still personal to you.
And is there room within a personal statement for students to talk about extracurricular activities and their other interests outside of their international A-levels or their pre-U courses?
So my advice would be to always speak to different universities. When you are interested in their particular course, ask about the admissions process, ask about what they're looking for in a personal statement. But generally speaking, we always say that at least 80% should be about the course, why you're suitable for the course, why you have the skills for the course. And then maybe up to about 20% can be about you being a well-rounded individual, because we do want people who are going to come with different interests, different passions, different skills, because that's what makes a good student body and also a good medical school body as well.
And talking about different experiences, we often hear medical schools talking about the need for work experience and students to, have gone out and found a placement or perhaps done some additional experience. But Aaron, from your work with medical schools, how important is the work experience?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think it gives you not only the academic side, but the ability to develop other skills, teamwork, communication, and these types of things. But one thing that's probably really important to mention is what work experience is. And it's having the opportunity and the access to specific types of experience that's really getting a focus on for medical schools, so that they can ensure they can widen access to their courses. So whether it's paid or whether it's unpaid, or whether you have access to this shadowing at a hospital, or whether you have other experience that you need to do. And are really important to reflect on that experience in your personal statement, as well as possibly at interview.
Any top tips then, Jess, for the types of work experience perhaps that are good to undertake?
So as has been mentioned, it is absolutely fantastic if they can get a clinical work experience, if they can shadow a doctor, if they can work in a hospital. That is absolutely wonderful. However, we do understand that for a lot of students, particularly those who are under the age of 18, because many are under the age of 18 when they are applying, it is very hard to get experience in hospitals, in doctors' surgeries and things like that. So what we always say is that it's about the skills that you're learning when you are doing your work experience. So the decision making that you might be doing as part of a work experience, it might be you're showing, you're doing a work experience and you want to show your ability to learn, to work in a team, your communication skills, as was mentioned earlier, caring and supportive attitudes. That is what we want to see from a work experience. The insight into what you're about to do for the next 5 years and for the next however many years in your career, that's what we'd also want to see. But it is about developing the core values in of the NHS. So your compassion, your dignity, improving lives, everybody counts. Those are the different types of skills and knowledge that we would want to see. One of my best students that I saw come through the university was that her work experience was being a waitress for 3 years, because she was doing long shifts, she was standing on her feet, she was dealing with children, families, the elderly, she was developing those communication skills, those team working skills. They were all absolutely essential. Yes, she did a little bit of extra things on the side, she did additional work experience, but the way that she communicated the skills as being a waitress and how adaptable they were for medicine was absolutely essential.
And I guess the key advice is how that's then talked about within the personal statement and drawing out those key skills and key
Absolutely, that's exactly what we want to see.
So for a student who has worked their way through the process, they've chosen the right subjects at their international A-levels, they have started to get their work experience and personal statement together, one of the next things to think about is then their admissions tests, of which there's two main types that they'll be sitting. One used by quite a number of UK universities is the BMAT. And Mark, I wonder if you could introduce us to the structure of the BMAT and the different sections that students would be tested upon.
Yes, so BMAT is the biomedical admissions test. There's 3 sections. So the first section is effectively a thinking skills paper, and it has 35 multiple choice questions, and you have 1 hour to answer it. The second section is a science and maths paper. That's 27 questions in half an hour. And the third section is a writing task. You have half an hour to answer one from a choice of 3 questions.
And with that section 3, we often hear students who are a bit maybe more concerned about that. What advice would you give about that sort of extended writing?
So the writing, the advice would give is to practice, as with all the sections, but section 3 in particular, practice answering questions under time conditions. So what you should do is set yourself a paper that you've not looked at before. There are plenty of papers on the website. So download one that you've not looked at before. Under time conditions, practice the skill of responding to an unseen prompt in the way required. So it will typically ask you to explain what the statement means. There'll be a brief statement. Say, explain what that statement means. give an argument to the contrary, and then somehow reach conclusion. So there's a fairly familiar pattern, but it's not always exactly like that. But get used to responding to an unseen prompt in that time, and developing that skill of planning your essay in advance, making sure you know what you're going to say before you start, and then write your essay in the time conditions.
And I know there's some different resources out there that students can look at to help with their preparation. Are there any particular areas that students that you would advise they would look at to find out more?
I'd recommend that students first go to the resources on our website. So there are plenty of free resources. There are past papers stretching all the way back to 2003. There are video guides. There's an extended Section 2 subject knowledge guide, which you can use as a revision tool. And there are kind of explanations for each section about how to approach each of those.
Yeah, I think exactly all of that. And I think one of the big things to mention is that everything on our website is all free. So all the information that we have on our website is all the information you should ever need in order to prepare for that course. So there's no additional books or courses to pay for. Everything is on the website that we could test and we prepare you for.
It's important to know you don't need to be registered for BMAT to access the resources, so they're just open to anybody.
That's great to hear. And when in the process would students typically take their BMAT? Is that something that's undertaken before they submit their UCAS application or after?
So both, in fact. So we have one date in August, typically the end of August each year, and one date at the end of October / early November. So that's one before the UCAS deadline and one after. And this gives students the opportunity to either get the result before that or after the UCAS deadline. But typically in the UK, we don't, for BMAT, see universities using it as a cutoff. So students shouldn't be scared that whatever result they get is going to impact significantly on their opportunities. And we see this in the students we see at open days, medical students, dental students that 4th, 5th year scores, 5th years at university, and they've got not in the top 10% of BMAT because it's really difficult to get in that top 10% because we are looking at the top maybe 10% of students globally for medical school, and then we're trying to distinguish between them.
If a student is thinking of taking a gap year, do they do the BMAT in the year in which they'll be applying, or does that work in a different way?
Yeah, so it's important to know that you should take the BMAT in the year that you are applying. So if you're thinking of taking a gap year, that will depend whether you are intending to apply before you take your gap year and go for a deferred entry, in which case you take it early. Or if you're thinking of taking a gap year and then applying when you return, then you take it afterwards. But it's always in the admissions round when you are processing your application and putting in your UCAS application.
And how would Cambridge International learners overseas go about taking the BMAT? Is this something that they can take in a centre or a school local to where they are?
Exactly that. So yes, we have centres all around the world, and you shouldn't have to travel too far in order to get to that place where you'll take the test. And there are a lot of schools around the world that will administer the test for you. So it may be that your school will support you in administering the test as if it was another exam in the school. Or you may have to go to a test centre such as the British Council, for example, where you'll go to their venue and it will be invigilated in a very similar manner.
And for any teachers and advisors that may be listening, if they're looking to set their school up as a test centre, is that something they're able to do?
Yes, absolutely. We have all the information they need on our website and can be shared. So there's a process we go to make sure that there's quality assurance around the way they may invigilate, and they have the right procedures such as secure material, the ability to secure the materials, and absolutely we can receive the application from them.
And Aaron, you touched upon briefly how universities may use the admissions test as part of the process, but I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Universities have a bit more flexibility in the way they use it. However, either the BMAT or UCAT will be compulsory in that process. So typically what we see is they'll bring academic scores such as the IGCSE or International A-Level, and then alongside that, students will have their personal statement and then their score for BMAT, whether that's pre or post UCAS application. And universities are free to put different weightings on that, based on the specific sections or the total score you may get for your BMAT. So it's really down to what the university values, what maybe reflects their local community or their university's vision. So look at the university websites to see how they may use it, because they're becoming even more transparent these days about how they may use the results from BMAT as well as other parts of your application.
Thanks, Aaron. And Jess, I know that the University of Anglia uses the UCAT test. How is that used as part of the admissions process?
So as you have said, we do use the UCAT process. And what happens is that when we receive an application, what we would call the first screening, we receive the application, we look at the IGCSEs, the A-levels or the international A-levels, we'll look at the personal statement, the reference, and a work experience form that they will have filled in. And then we look at the UCAT score. And in terms of the reviewing of it, what we do is we use the UCAT score, but most parts of the UCAT, and the IGCSEs to rank our students, and then we invite the top section of those students usually to interview. And then during the interviews, we'll interview them, but we might also look back at the UCAT score during the interview process as well.
Thanks. And I know the UCAT tests slightly different skills to the BMAT. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what sections the UCAT involves.
Yes, so there are a number of sections within the UCAT, and it generally tends to look at mainly 5 sections, which is verbal reasoning, decision making, abstract reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and situational judgment. And each of those sections are anywhere between, normally you've got anywhere from kind of 13 minutes to maybe 26 minutes, 31 minutes, and they are fast fire questions where you are expected, your mind is expected to work very fast. So for example, within verbal reasoning, you have 21 minutes, there are 11 passages to read and 44 multiple choice questions. So it is very, very fast paced, if that makes sense. There is, as is mentioned earlier, in terms of the BMAT, there is a lot of online resources that students can use to help prepare themselves. And the UCATs advise that you have a look on their question tutorials. There's free question banks. There are practice tests, and you can have a look on them to help familiarise yourself.
And typically the UCAT, is that taken prior to the UCAS deadline or afterwards?
It is indeed also taken before the UCAS deadline. So in 2019, the test dates were from the 1st of July to the 2nd of October, with the 15th of October being the medicine deadline. And it opens for booking and for registration. This year it opened on the 1st of May.
And again, this is something that can be taken overseas, presumably.
It is. They, as far as I'm aware, they have test centres in 160 locations across 130 countries.
Thank you. So the next step for successful candidates so far will be to attend an interview. We know that medical schools across the UK do use interviews as quite an important part of the screening process and to help determine who will be the doctors of the future. Jess, maybe you could tell us a bit about the style of interviews that are used for medicine.
So they can vary. So there can be almost the traditional style of interview, which is almost the panel style. That is normally the traditional style. However, more and more universities are moving more towards the multiple mini interviews, which is what we use at the University of East Anglia. And we currently have 6 5-minute workstations. So 6 5-minute interviews with 1 minute and 30 seconds in between each, so about 90 seconds in between each workstation. So the interview process is actually over in about 50 minutes, but we will have assessed them 6 times in that period and 6 different people. Now, I know that some students hear that and they start to panic and they start to think that that sounds very intense. But actually, from our point of view, we tend to find that students perform better, that they have 6 different people that they can speak to. They have 6 different areas where they have a minute and a half to prepare. They have a minute and a half to, if they feel that the last workstation didn't go quite as well, they have a minute and a half to regroup, relax, and start to focus on somebody who wasn't in the last workstation. So we tend to find that students do perform better for us, and we are able to see what we need from the students within those 6 workstations.
And in order to take part in an interview, whether it's a panel style or the MMI, would students normally need to come to the UK for that, or is that something that can be done remotely or via Skype perhaps?
So for us, we do have to have face-to-face interviews. The vast majority of those are done in Norwich on the UEA campus. However, previously, we have done interviews in Hong Kong and in Dubai. Obviously, it depends on where our students are coming from. However, preference would be to come onto campus because obviously it's a fantastic opportunity for the student themselves to see where they might be studying for the next 5 years.
Aaron, what advice would you have for students who are applying to medical programmes and will be facing an interview soon?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, it's about maintaining the personal, good preparation, but also remembering, this is all about you and bringing your personal qualities to this. I think a couple of things to mention in terms of BMAT is that number one, the Section 3 written communication question is passed on to your university. And as part of your interview process, you may be given a copy of this and asked to explain things in more detail that you may not have had time to explain in the BMAT test. So they're not expecting you to remember it word for word, but thinking about the ideas that you've explained, arguing for and against, to really draw out what you were trying to explain and conclude. And the other thing I mentioned is that it's also, if you're getting to the interview stage, it's likely you would have got a rounded academic approach. You may have done well on the BMAT, as well as your personal statement. So it's that all-rounded approach. And you're now at the point where you can really build on everything that you've shown before in terms of academic ability and experiences and really draw that into what medicine might be like in those interviews through those workstations if it's an MMI.
Thank you, and it sounds good advice then for learners to have a look at the universities they're looking at to see the format, because obviously it can vary quite a bit. So once somebody has successfully passed their interview, hopefully students will receive an offer, which would typically be a conditional offer upon meeting their required grades in their Cambridge Pre-U or Cambridge International A-levels. But what's the next step in the process?
So normally the next step would be to make sure that they are maintaining those high grades. Obviously, when they have applied, we've seen their predicted grades, and we want to make sure that those students are really working hard to make sure that they get the grades that are required for the universities, that they are maintaining any of the interests that they might have as well, and that they may also continue to do voluntary work experience just to help maintain those skills before they go to university. But the academic side of things is absolutely essential. So please do focus on your international A-levels.
Thank you very much. We've taken you through the process then from making your choices and thinking about the right subjects for medicine, preparing personal statements, thinking about the interview process and the all-important admissions tests as well. So before we finish, I'd like to ask our panel for any further top tips and advice to share with candidates. Mark?
My tip would be to prepare very early, so doing thorough research into the medical schools that you're interested in, making sure that you're aware of their requirements. And when it comes to the admissions test, make sure that you set aside enough time so that you look at the type of preparation you need to do early on so that you have a comfortable amount of time in which to prepare, rather than looking late and maybe stressing yourself or panicking.
Thank you. Aaron?
I think, yes, just to build on that, really, look at all the information we have free on our website. So the test specification that looks at all of the curriculum you might know for each of the sections. We have an online guide that's on a platform called Moodle, which students might be more familiar with, and that allows them to download the content and search for specific content in the curriculum that they may have not studied for a little while, maybe a year or two. And then also we have all of our past papers, it'll be the 16th year this year. So, and last month, in July 2019, we recorded a live chat. So that's an hour long, which students can access in addition to this great content to see what other students are asking and questions they may not have thought of at the time.
Jess?
And I think my advice is twofold. One is to, yes, medicine is incredibly competitive in the UK, particularly for international students, but it is about making sure that you are applying to universities that suit your style of learning, that you are going to thrive in that educational environment. Do you want to start your clinical placements on your course within the first 3 weeks of the course, or do you prefer to do more of your academic learning first of all before you put it into practice in your clinical placements? think about the style of the university, think about the size of the medical school, what type of support are you going to get, when are your placements going to be. That all comes into the research that was mentioned prior, making sure that you are doing your research, make sure that you're applying to the correct universities. And then my other side of things would be that during the application stage, a lot of universities will be looking into how students feel that they can fit into medicine as a career. And medicine as a career in the UK involves a huge amount of interaction with the National Healthcare Service. It is a National Healthcare Service profession, and it is about making sure that in the research stage, in the preparation stage, that you understand that the role that the NHS plays in the society in the UK, you understand the strengths, the problems that the NHS may be encountering, and that you are aware of the environment that you are about to go into. So my advice would be to check the medical schools, but also check the environment that you're about to go and work into, particularly you'll go straight into it after medical school with your foundation 1, your foundation 2 years. So about making sure that you are aware of the environment.
Great advice. Thank you very much. And a huge thanks to Mark, to Aaron and to Jess for joining us at this Cambridge International University Admissions podcast. And thank you very much to you all for listening. If you'd like further information about where your Cambridge International qualifications can take you, visit cambridgeinternational.org/recognition.
Thank you for listening to this podcast from Cambridge Assessment International Education. For more podcasts and further information, please visit www.cambridgeinternational.org.